Please welcome to the stage Eddie Glaude Jr., New York Times best-selling author and the chair of African American Studies at Princeton University. Moderated by Brandon Jones, Vice President and Global Head of Sales Development at ServiceNow.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Jones, and I'm excited to be here and have the pleasure of hosting this conversation, the very timely conversation, Lessons in Optimism, the History of Black Male Leadership, with New York Times bestselling author and the chair of Princeton University's Department of African American Studies, Dr. Eddie Glaude. To the audience, thank you for joining us, and please don't hesitate to ask questions in the Q&A room. Dr. Glaude, let's dive in. So the premise of this conversation is that we should all be students of history, able to see the lessons of the past and apply those lessons to our current challenges and opportunities. Clearly, the context of this conversation has become much more acute given the recent events and the tragic killings in Buffalo. Would love to have you weave your perspective in throughout our discussion today. But first, let's start with you. By every measure, you are a highly qualified and high-achieving academic Black man. We've read your bio. We're all very impressed. We want to know a little bit more about your origin story. When you were growing up, what did you learn about leadership, either directly or indirectly, from your family that impacts how you lead today?
Well, first of all, it's such a delight to be in conversation with you, Brandon, and to be back with the ELC. It's certainly an extraordinary organization, and these are trying times. I think about the importance of history as a backdrop to our conversation because, it's a set, this formulation is attributed to Mark Twain, but we're not sure if he said it. History doesn't repeat, but it sure rhymes. And there's an echo of the past in our current moment. What did I learn growing up on the coast of Mississippi that's really essential to my understanding of leadership? There are at least three elements. One is a kind of honesty, a kind of sincerity. What does it mean to be true to what you believe, to be forthright in your commitments, to be honest with yourself and with others? And that can translate as a kind of transparency. But in some ways, it means to stand up for what you believe. And of course, in order to stand up for what you believe means that you have to be courageous. You have to cultivate the habits of courage and not be cowardly. Stand up, take responsibility for what you believe, fight for what you believe. Be courageous enough to stand out, to sing off key so that you could be heard. And then the last element, so, there's honesty, there's courage. The last element, I think, because I grew up on the coast with my mother who had her first baby in the 9th grade. She dropped out of high school. My father, who was a veteran of the Vietnam War, was the first African-American hired at the post office in second African-American hired at the post office in Pascagoula, Mississippi. But I learned from both of them, and they had their babies young. I'm the youngest of four. What did I learn? Grit, perseverance. No matter what the storms bring, get up and keep moving forward. Grit. I mean, just a commitment to pursuing your dreams, to taking care of the people you love, no matter what the world throws at you. So those are the three elements that come to mind.
Love that. So clearly your parents, very courageous in many ways. Who are some other folks that inspire you? You talk about, honesty, courage. Who are some of the folks kind of coming up really inspired you on those fronts?
Well, in my childhood, there was my teachers. I'm thinking about Miss Polk, who became Dr. Polk. She understood the complexity of our household because even as I talk about my mother and father in the way that I do, I had a very vexed relationship with my dad. He scared the living daylights out of me. I could literally shudder my bones when he just stared at me, So I was afraid of him, and I've been trying to prove, I think, for much of my life that I'm not a coward because he made me feel so afraid at times. But Miss Polk and some other teachers, my baseball coaches, Coach Biden, there were folk who recognized that I had talent. that there was something in my eyes, a sparkle in my eyes, I suppose. There were other folks who told me that I didn't know my place, you know, because I grew up on the coast of Mississippi, after all. And, you know, actually, I think, to be honest with you, Brandon, it all happened. It all came together at Morehouse. You know, at Morehouse College is this place that, you know, they place a crown above your head and then say, grow into it.
Yeah.
So you know, I went to college at 16, so I basically ran away from home, and I went to Morehouse, and it was there, Dr. Parker, Dr. Barksdale, and my closest partners, and it was there that I think the raw stuff that my mom and my dad put in me became the stuff that make me who I am today. Yeah.
I love that. And as a Howard University graduate myself, I can attest to how important that experience is to really come into your own. You shared a lot, you know, I think is really interesting in terms of the ingredients that, you know, made you to the person you are today. What's something else that most people don't know about you? You know, something that you would say is somewhat surprising, or would be, you know, folks would be surprised about, you know, in your formative years?
Oh, in my formative years? Oh, wow. You know, I was, you know, there's an experience. Again, I give you a sense of my parents. They were young, they were growing up with us. But I was involved in politics. I loved politics. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I thought I was going to run for political office in the state of Mississippi. Or when I went to Atlanta, I thought I was going to stay in Georgia and run for office. But when I was 15 years old, I got invited, because of all of my work, to be a special guest of the Mississippi Democratic Party at the Democratic National Convention in San Francisco. It's 1984. And I remember that convention. That's the convention that Jesse Jackson turned upside down with his first presidential run. That's the convention that Mario Cuomo delivered his Tale of Two Cities speech. You know, that convention was extraordinary. And I remember as a young man walking into the elevator, country boy from Mississippi, and there was Jesse Jackson. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and he asked me who I was and where I was from. And he told me that I was destined for great things. It was an amazing affirmation, a kind of what we might describe, Brother Brandon, as an eruption of the holy into the ordinary. You know, and you know, the irony is that I actually wrote the epilogue to a collection of Reverend Jackson's sermons.
Wow.
That was published 2 years ago, and I talked about that encounter as a 15-year-old boy. Yeah, that's
incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And as a Southside Chicago native, obviously, Reverend Jackson is one of the major figures. All right, switching gears a little bit. We know you are a scholar and great thinker of the great thinker and writer James Baldwin, who once said, "It is the responsibility of the Negro writer to excavate the real history of this country. We must tell the truth till we can no longer bear it." And he often encourages us to imagine ourselves anew. Now, we know that there are aspects of the African-American history in this country that have been erased, distorted, ignored. What are examples in African-American history, particularly the lived experiences and achievements of Black men in America, that deserve more attention from historians and the public in general, in your opinion?
Well, you know, I like to think about, you know, I mean, I think a really great moment to really reflect on is radical Reconstruction. And I bring it up for a reason, right? Because, you know, in January 6th, when there were those who attempted to overthrow the government, they sacked the Capitol, screaming, "Stop the steal." On the floor of the Senate, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas invoked the Compromise of 1877. The compromise that, in effect, ended radical Reconstruction, returned the South to the hands of those who were actually in rebellion, and in some ways threw the nation into the Jim Crow Dark Ages, as it were. But during radical Reconstruction, you had these former enslaved people who engaged in what could only be thought of as a kind of miracle, as they began to not only educate themselves, but also to assume the reins and burdens of citizenship. So when we think about public school systems, when we think about American public life, when we think about the founding of the modern US nation state, radical Reconstruction is at the heart of it.
Mm.
And Black legislators across the South, from South Carolina to Mississippi to Louisiana, were in the midst of it all, right?
Mm.
And so I think part of what we need to tell a thicker story about are the ways in which Black people in general, and Black men in particular, because remember, Black women were not granted the franchise with the 15th Amendment.
Right.
So Black men in particular played a significant role in salvaging American democracy in this moment after the bloody carnage of the Civil War. And, I'm talking from folks from Hiram Revels across the board. So I think we need to tell a thicker story about the role of Black folk in the body politic, not just simply as folk who are engaging in struggle like the Civil Rights Movement, but folk who actually put in place things that Americans take for granted, like public education, for example.
Got it. I think that's really interesting. And it kind of leads to a follow-up question around, now we're in the information age, right? So one question someone could say is, how is it possible in this age that we still have these stories to uncover when information is so readily available? On the other side, there's many challenges around organizing around messages, putting together action that's informed. How do you reconcile these lessons of the past with the information age that we live in today in terms of how we should be thinking about understanding our history and then using those lessons moving forward?
Well, Brother Brandon, Americans have always preferred their illusion straight, no chaser. We have told ourselves in some ways a lie in order to secure our innocence. As I write and begin again, we like to believe that we're the shining city on the hill, that we're an example of democracy achieved. In so many ways, we can't tell ourselves the truth about who we are and what we've done, because to admit to that truth says something about, in fact, who we are. So to admit to the conditions that have led to Buffalo, to say that this young 18-year-old is not some mentally insane, to quote Tucker Carlson, child engaged in a kind of racist rant, but rather this child is a reflection. This young man, this 18-year-old is a reflection of an ideological current that has been a part of the American project since its inception, means that you have to confront something in you. And so there's a reason why our story as a country, why it has to be aspirational, why it has to always contain hope, because just like children want fairy tales that have happy endings, we're a country that's full of adolescents who refuse to grow up. So there's always this uneasy relationship with the truth about who we are. Now, how does that take shape in the context of the information age as you've described it? Well, remember, the information age in our current moment is fragmented, it's fractured. We have an information ecosystem that allows folk to kind of move into their silos and have their opinions and parochialisms confirmed and reconfirmed.
Yeah.
So information is rampant, but it's not necessarily information that lends itself to reasoned deliberation where people can actually convince each other to think otherwise. Instead, we live in an information ecosystem that confirms your prejudices. And I like to put it this way: there's a distinction between being provincial and being parochial. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi. There's some things I just wasn't exposed to before I got to Morehouse. I just didn't see it. I didn't know what the hell go-go music was before I went to Morehouse, right? And so there, we were listening to the blues and R&B, right? At the time when I hit Morehouse in '85. And so to see the culture in New York, there's something about the way in which so there's provincialism that has everything to do with the circumstances of one's living. But then there's parochialism. And parochialism is when you choose to be narrow. I'm going to go to this school because they've desegregated in Brown v. Board of Education. So we're going to start some seg schools and we're going to go over here. Parochialism is a choice. So in this information age, we find people choosing to be narrow, choosing to confirm their prejudices and the like. So it actually exacerbates our national tendency to want to tell ourselves lies. and
Wow.
to live in the comfort of our illusions, as it were.
And that's a tough challenge because things are only going to start moving more in that direction. So these silos will be very, very difficult challenges we'll have to face together. And this is a great setup for the next question, which again is a lot more acute given the situation in Buffalo. Despite the economic, political, and social progress Black men in this country have experienced, over the recent decades, a powerful narrative of Black men as victims and/or victimizers persists. How can Black men in this country use the lessons of the past to change the underlying assumptions and the narrative of our current challenges and opportunities?
Well, those of us who are in positions of power, those of us who have access to a certain kind of storytelling, we must always engage in the political work of shifting the narratives, of shifting the story. Right. Look, my son was an AAU basketball player, Division I caliber basketball player. Okay. And I remember being in gyms all over the country. And what did I see in those gyms? I saw Black fathers with their sons. I saw Black men alone with their families, not just the boy on the court, but with everybody else. I saw men engaged. We know that there's recent data showing that even though Black men, for example, spend actually more time with their children, right, than white men of a similar economic background, right? It's just how we register the notion of family, how it's being charted, right? Du Bois was even getting at this in the Philadelphia Negro early on, even with his own complex Victorian sensibility. So part of what we have to do is to understand the political significance of shifting the narrative. What does it mean to tell a different story about resource-deprived communities? What does it mean to tell a different story about the criminal justice system and how we get swept up? What does it mean to tell a different story about the education gap and what that means for Black boys and Black girls? We have to shift the narratives because in some ways, the current story, Brandon, has everything to do with, right, shifting the onus of responsibility.
Right.
See, this is the key thing, bro. This is what I want to insist upon. America doesn't look the way it does by accident. The state of Mississippi doesn't look the way it does by accident. You have to convince me to believe that every single day, millions of Black men are making stupid decisions simultaneously in order to account for the world as it is. That makes no sense. There's a structural reality that we have to tell the story about. And, I keep telling my friends on television, we have to be clear. America hasn't been a genuine democracy. It wasn't until 1965. Right. And then barely then. And so part of what we have to do is to understand those of us in media, those of us in corporate America, those of us in politics, those of us in the classroom, wherever we happen to be in our particular spaces, we have to change the story. We have to shift the narrative. And that involves telling the truth about what we see, what we experience, and what we know. And let's be very clear. That doesn't mean disregarding the fact that Black folk, that we got some folk who are knuckleheads. That doesn't make,
of course.
Part of, this is, I know I'm talking a lot here, but part of what we have to do is to understand how a certain gaze distorts our representation of who we are.
Right.
And when you're preoccupied with that gaze, you think only thing you need to talk about is joy. Or if you're preoccupied with that gaze, the only thing you need to do is talk about social problems. Black people are complicated human beings. And once we understand that as our point of departure, then we're going to tell complex stories about complex people.
Very interesting. And I think, you highlighted the importance of changing the narrative. And I guess the question becomes, what is the most effective way today to change that narrative in a country that tends to get wrong the concept of Black male leadership? You mentioned the stat of Black men who are fathers spending more time with their kids. That's a story that needs to be told a little bit more. What are the levers that are within reach to really drive change on that front from your perspective?
It's hard. I think, places where we are, where we dominate in terms of the sports sector, in terms of entertainment sectors, those of us who are in politics and media, these are important places. I mean, you think about, this is one of the challenging moments during the Obama administration. Here we had a Black male president for the first time in the history of the country. And I remember when he came to Morehouse and he gave a lecture or talk that felt like it was trading in the old stereotypes. And Ta-Nehisi Coates and others screamed, foul, foul, right? And so part of what we have to do is that when we're in these spaces, is not trade in these social stereotypes, but actually create the conditions under which we shift the center of gravity. And I think athletes can do this. I think entertainers can do this because that's where we're dominant. I think preachers can do this. And I certainly think politicians can do it, particularly with regards to how these assumptions and stereotypes drive policy decisions. And let me say this, Brandon, this is particularly important in this current moment as we're hearing cries of crime being out of control. And so as we're hearing the calls for law and order again, it's almost as if we're back in the 1990s again. We need to be even more aggressive in disrupting a certain set of assumptions around Black communities, and particularly violent Black, quote unquote, violent Black men. You know, they either make us Bigger Thomas or Willie Horton. We're either one or the other. And by virtue of those stereotypes, it's very difficult to break through and actually deal with the question of safety and security in our communities.
Wow. Powerful. I want to get to an audience question that I think is robust as a father and also for the sons and daughters. The question is, it seems like we all have parents, fathers especially, and other individuals who put a lot of pressure on us to be better and to be great. What mental advice would you give to a young Black adult who is trying to find his way in the world and is just starting out in their career?
Wow. That's a powerful question. It's a hard question. You know, I keep telling myself, and I used to tell my son this all the time, the world conspires to make you small. And the question is whether you're going to be complicit. So oftentimes what we do, and this is not just for Black men or Black boys or Black, you know, it's for all of us. The world often, as a precondition for your entree into it, is that you leave the particularities of who you are at the door as a condition for you to enter. And so we often find ourselves quiet, making ourselves small, quieting our voices. And then we get socialized in making ourselves small and quieting ourselves. What does it mean to think like Whitman, that you contain the multitudes? What does it mean to think of yourself as expansive, such that you can do like Coltrane and take giant steps? Right? So part of what I suggest, I say to myself over and over again, is that whatever space I'm in, I'm supposed to be in. Because I don't want what Du Bois calls that temptation of doubt to enter into my spirit, which then becomes corrosive. Because the most dangerous person I've ever met, one of the most dangerous people in my profession, right, is the insecure Black man with tenure, with power. So you don't want to be that insecure person, because that's that doubt that's creeped in, and then you're moving about in ways that you're concerned more about what folks are thinking about you as opposed to what you've been called to do. So at the end of the day, the world conspires to make you small. Answer the question: will you be complicit? Will you
Powerful.
be complicit?
And some names popped in my mind as you were talking that will remain unnamed for this conversation. Let's switch gears a little bit to our good buddy W.E.B. Du Bois, who in 1926 delivered an address titled "Criteria of Negro Art" at the Chicago Conference for the NAACP. He asked the audience, "What do we want? What is the thing we are after? We want to be Americans, full-fledged Americans with all rights of American citizens. But is that all? Do we want simply to be Americans?" How would you answer Du Bois' question within the context of this event? What do Black men want? Do we want simply to be Americans, be ourselves, or do we want something else entirely?
See, the thing is that we want to be very, very careful, because when we talk about Black men in leadership, we're not doing so in light of on the condition of the absence of Black women.
Mm.
We're not doing so in the name of a desire or demand to participate in patriarchy. You know, that part of the problem is that Black men can't exercise patriarchal power. That's not what we're talking about.
Mm.
When we talk about what does it mean to be American, what are our aims and objectives, we need to first understand that America is not an idea. America is an argument. It's a fight. The question of what being American is has not been discovered yet.
Mm.
See, that's the thing, right? We haven't discovered who we are yet. And so we actually think that the matter is settled and that we just need to gain inclusion. No.
Mm.
We haven't discovered who we are as a nation yet.
Mm.
And so part of what I think in terms of rendering Du Bois's provocation in this current moment is that what Black men and Black women, what all of us need to do is to put forward an argument about what America is that affirms the dignity and standing of every human being, no matter the color of their skin, no matter their zip code, no matter their gender, no matter who they love, right? No matter their ability, right? But to offer an idea of the world where anybody, a country boy from Moss Point, Mississippi, can not just be an exception, but who can dream in the most expansive of ways. And we create the conditions under which that can happen. But right now, we're a country so overrun by greed, selfishness, and hate that babies from the get-go find themselves running into brick walls. So what do Black men as leaders want? To my mind, if we're worth anything, we want a just world.
Wow.
Period.
Put concisely. Great perspective there, and I appreciate that. I'm going to take another question from the audience. I think cuts straight to the core of what many struggle with in corporate America. How do we as Black men walk in our authenticity in corporate spaces where we are outnumbered significantly by other demographics, including Black women and other people of color?
Well, first of all, we walk in excellence, right? So the first thing you got to do is be, I know it sounds terrible, but we have to be 2x, 3 times as good at what we do than most people we work with. So you walk in excellence, and excellence is in fact being better than just simply good. So that's the base, that's the ground condition, right? And then the second thing is that I think we can't be naive, right? Power operates in corporate spaces like they operate in politics, like it operates in academia and the like. So you can't just walk around being angry and screaming at folk and sagging or whatever how you want to go, right? There's certain kinds of demands of the spaces within which we work. So the base condition is being excellent, great at what you do. The second thing is not being naive, understanding what power functions. And the third thing is to be committed to the 3 values that I just laid out in the very beginning of our conversation. You want to be honest, you want to be courageous, you want to show grit. Because let me tell you something, if you think you can compromise your soul from the very beginning, and then once you get power, you'll be all right, that's not true. If you've been selling yourself out from day one, there's no reason to believe that once you get to the C-suite that you're going to be anything but what you've been from the very beginning.
Oof.
So you have to cultivate the habits of courage.
That's rich.
In your ascent. Does that make sense, B?
It does. Okay. And it's a challenge, right? The last piece that you articulated is a challenge to everyone in corporate America to be who you are and be excellent. Switching gears again, we've said all too often that we have our eyes set on the successes of the past and have crowned those leaders as models for what Black leadership should look like and sound like in the 21st century. In doing so, we fail to understand and consider the uniqueness of our present challenges and the promises that lie ahead. If you have the power to reimagine what Black male leadership looks like in this country, what may be that new picture that you would co-create for us?
I I just gave the baccalaureate at Wake Forest University. It was just beautiful. And I was thinking through something, Brandon. There's one of my favorite books is Emerson's Nature. And he opens that book with, our age is retrospective, right? And it's this kind of lamentation about the past overrunning the future. Right? Our ancestors saw God in person. We just have to see what they said about it. That kind of thing. He wants us to have an original relationship to the universe, as it were, an ongoing revelation. When I was younger, I thought that was just so liberating. But then I've realized something, that sometimes we run away from the past towards an uncharted future. And what happens is that hubris hollows out our dreams because we haven't learned the lessons of the past. Mm. So part of what we have to do is, as we dream of the world as it ought to be, we must do so close to the ground in the world as it is. We have to learn the lessons of the past as a precondition to dream the world as it should be or ought to be. Now, that's a preface to say this, and by way of answer to your question. I want us to simply be. The vision I have is for me to be able to bring my full self into every room where I don't have to code switch, where I'm not engaged using part of my gray matter to read the room to see what these particular people are thinking about me, where I have to I want to bring the fullness of my brilliance and creativity to the table. And I think what we have to do is pave the way for the next generation of leaders to be able to do that by modeling what it means to be fully ourselves in these spaces. Mm. Some of us have achieved a certain kind of standing and status where we can do it. Mm. And so we need to model it now. So my dream, right, is for a form of leadership where we are fully ourselves in all of its complexity, where we can how can I put it, Doc? We can make the workplace swing Duke Ellington style.
I love that. And two takeaways that come to mind. One is this muscle of authenticity needs to be flexed. It's something that people inherently want to do, but you're challenging folks to really own that, be excellent and own that. And that's how you pave the way. Mm-hmm. The second piece, it actually brings back to a conversation we had previously where in a world today that orients, when you think about Black men who have been successful, it skews towards many times athletes, entertainers, folks that have megaphones that go far and beyond what you would consider folks are ready for to kind of carry that torch or be the message holder for Black men. What do you think is most needed in our community in terms of leadership at the ground level to take away some of that pressure or some of that, platform level influence happening only at that highest level of folks that may not necessarily be prepared to stand up to everything that comes with it?
It's ironic. The model for my conception of leadership or my idea of leadership is actually Miss Ella Baker. And Miss Baker was the mastermind, one of the masterminds of the Black freedom movement of the 20th century. Executive secretary of SCLC, the first one. She was organizer, field secretary of the NAACP, organizing NAACP chapters in the South in the 30s and 40s. Was the patron of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, kept SCLC and NAACP and all these folks off of those young folk as they organized the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She said, "We are the leaders we've been looking for. We are the leaders. You are the leader you've been looking for. We don't need some preacher in a pulpit to lead us. We don't need to be followers. We all need to be leaders. We, as the scripture said, right? It's inscribed on the heart. You don't need priests. We all have the potential to be prophets, right? So part of what that means is creating the conditions under which everyday ordinary folk can become the kinds of people that are transformative in their own circumstances. And I think that's really important. That's how Fannie Lou Hamer emerged. That's how Unita Blackwell emerged. That's how these sharecroppers who were out there in cotton fields, emerged as leaders of the Mississippi Freedom Movement. So part of what we have to do is to understand that schools, understand that local communities, that local governments that are distributing resources, understand that the public life, the civic life of our local communities, that's not going to be run by Al Sharpton.
Right.
That's not going to be determined by Kamala Harris. That's going to be determined by you and me. And what we have to do is figure out a way to engage as we're trying desperately to keep a roof over our head and put food on the table. That's a hard balance to me.
And you actually left a quote around, I forget exactly what it was, but something around the type of leaders we need are the ones that allow other leaders to lead. I forget what the quote is. You might want to leave us with that. I found it to be powerful and very much.
One way to put it is that, we need the type of leaders who are working to make themselves unnecessary.
That's deep. I know we're running. We had about 5 minutes left. We're running short on time, and I think I want, if I have to leave our audience with anything, it's kind of this blueprint you set: be courageous, have grit, be excellent, be a leader. Don't wait for somebody to guide you. And one of our questions from the audience is looking to dive into that and try to understand how they can adopt that. And the question that came up was, this idea of walking in excellence leaves very little room for mistakes. Can you talk about maybe a misstep or a situation that you personally encountered, as far as excellence is concerned, when others were expecting you to fail? How did you overcome potentially that situation? How would you advise Black men who are striving for excellence, who maybe make a misstep, to continue to move forward with that perception of excellence?
Well, look, excellence is not, let me be very, very clear. Excellence is not success 100% of the time. To think about excellence as always already success is to confuse it, right? So excellence involves risk. It entails failure. And the question becomes, what are the lessons learned in those moments? What did I learn when I was a bit too aggressive in this moment in pursuit of an agenda, and suddenly everything I wanted didn't come about because I played the card too hard? It's like in spades. I ran my trumps too early, then suddenly I lost control of the table.
Right.
So what is it? And so failure becomes part of the scene of instruction. And the thing is to be humble enough, and this is what's important about leadership, is to be humble enough to take in, right, one's failures as the condition for being better. It's just like lifting weights. You throw the weight up in order to break down the muscle, and then it comes back stronger. So the failure becomes the condition, one of the conditions, in order to become an even better leader. So excellence at its best entails risk. Risk exposes you to the potential of failure, which means the condition to be even better at what you do.
Well put. So we have a little bit over a minute remaining. I wanted to give you that minute to leave our audience of Black men striving for excellence with parting thoughts, and maybe to the extent that you want to weave in the recent situation in Buffalo. Please do.
American democracy stands on the precipice. There's no guarantee that the republic will survive this moment. The ugly forces, the ugly underbelly of American life has revealed itself once again. And in pursuit of your dreams, in pursuit of material gain, you may think you can sit on the sidelines, but you can't. If you're a true leader, if you're really committed to a just world, you have to make your choice. And so I think we all have to step up and step in. The republic requires us again. We've done it before. Each generation, as Frantz Fanon said, each generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. I hope you're on that road of discovery.
Wow. What a way to close. Just want to applaud you. Thank you so much, Dr. Glaude, for joining us. This conversation was extremely impactful, full of challenges, optimism, practicality, and more importantly, a blueprint for what leadership looks like. And we appreciate you and the work you do. All the best to you. And we'll toss it over to the next session. Thank you again for your time. Thank you to the audience for joining.